Hello, this is Lisa Shea, and today we're going to talk about what to do if your watercolor tube dries up. Now in general, watercolors are great because they start out wet in a tube, you squish them out into a pan, they get dry, and then you just make them wet again, and it's fine. They'll dry out, you get them wet. So in comparison with acrylics and oil paints, if those dry out, then they become unusable. But with watercolors, they're actually meant to be dry, and when they're dry, you just add some water and make them wet again, just like the things you probably used in elementary school where they came in those little circle dried out shapes. You add water and it's perfectly usable. But a challenge is if you get it in a tube and somehow the cap gets left off or something, now the stuff inside this tube is hard as a rock and you can't get it out anymore. So what I used to do is this is a Star Trek shot glass, so I'd put water up to the top of the shot glass. I'd leave the watercolor that was dried in the shot glass, and then over time the water would eat a channel up in there, and as the water dehydrated you were left with sludge at the bottom, which then you could get into a pan or something else and get your color back. But clearly this is a very long and tedious process, so this is not something I recommend. There's a much easier way to get your paints out of these tubes, and we are going to discuss some of the options. You can see at the bottom that the thing is just a crimp. And this is fairly thin metal foil. So let's look at the different ways of getting the paint back out of this tube. So one option we have here is to try to needle nose plier the end of the crimp open. So let's see if I can do that. Take the pliers. Oh, this always looks so easy. Alright, so it actually does unbend pretty reasonably. Alright, looks like we got 2 crimps down. Alright, so it's definitely thinner down there at the bottom, but that didn't help me in terms of getting at it because that is still sealed, as one would hope. But that might now be an easier space to get through. And this tube is actually a little more malleable, so my sitting of it in water, did actually help. That now there's liquidy stuff in there, so I suppose that gives a point in the favor of the letting it sit in water theory to be able to get the tube to squish out. Alright, so if we get that, I might get a paper towel for the blue on my fingers. I wonder if I can just cut that thing with some scissors. Let's see how this does. That's nice and thin. Oh, look at that. Alright, I think that was still in a sealed part. That didn't look like it actually opened anything up. Oh, did that open up? Right, yep. Getting closer though. There we go. Alright, so now we have access to the insides. And you can see that my sitting of it, well, I suppose I can see. I don't know how well you can see. But I can see that the sitting of it in the shot glass actually seems to have done some good, that it's sort of gooey. It's certainly not as squishy as it normally would have been, but that is nicely squishier. Now, I'll have to put all of this into something, because if I let this sit out in the air, it's just going to harden back up again, so then I'd have a rock inside this thing again. So I'm going to squish this all out into a container, and then it's okay if it dries. The point is just that I don't want it in this container, because that's hard to get to. If I squish it out into a little Tupperware, then it becomes something much easier to get to when I need to move sections of it into my pan or to do other kinds of painting activities with it. Okay, so if you have a tube that hardens up, you can either sit it in water like I did and it will slowly get it to get squishy again, or you can uncrimp the end of it, cut it open, and if that was rock hard it would probably be harder to do that kind of squishing open that I did, so maybe do this in conjunction with the getting it wet. But if it's rock hard and then you cut open the end, then you can use a razor blade or screwdriver or something like that to slowly scrape out the paint, and then once you get it into something else, it just re-liquefy it and you can use it again. So there's some ideas for you on dealing with paint that has become hardened. Ask with any questions. Okay, so here you can see that I finished cutting open the tube, and I just used a toothpick to scrape out the goo because it was gooey because I'd had it sitting in the water. And I've got this pretty clean, and now if I wanted to I could sit that in a little glass container and let that soak and do the same thing that I was doing with the shot glass. Here's the shot glass again. So I could put it into a container that was full of water, let the water evaporate over time. It would leave behind the paint, and then I could just let that dry out and then rehydrate it, because all of that paint right there is perfectly fine paint. It's fine to dry. I'm going to put it in a container, not about moisture issues, but just to keep dust out, because I don't want there to be dust and grit that gets into the paint. But other than that, it'll be perfectly fine to use. So again, ask if you have any questions. Okay, in the last section, we worked with a paint that I had had soaking in water for quite a while, and the result was that it had gotten gooey inside. So I was able to cut open the paint container and get most of the stuff out. And what I've done is I put the rest of it into a glass. The paint container is in there, cut open, and now I'm getting the last of the nice paints out of there, and then I'll just let the water dehydrate and I'll be left with the paint on the bottom. So this is a great way to get all the last bits out of any watercolor paint tube, so you don't miss out on anything. But in this one, I didn't soak it in the water, and you can see that it's got a crack in there. So we have a different problem here, which is that this is going to be completely dry. Now on the upside, this is cracking so much I probably won't even have to cut it. I can probably just rip it open with my hands. But let's get a little Tupperware. Got a Tupperware container because I have a feeling this is going to be messy. Let's just try seeing if I can. Oh look, I can. So this goes to show that if you wait long enough and let it dry out enough, you see how dry that is? Pieces are just falling, and I'm just literally pulling this apart with my hands. So this is Artist Loft, which is the Michaels brand. Now there's little bits of white in there, which is undoubtedly the paper slash tube, etc. And we might not want the white in our watercolor. But I can just peel this open and you can see the pieces that are coming out. So that pretty much came out in one chunk. Down here. And this looks like it may pretty much come out in one chunk. Yeah, so that's the rest of it. I don't see anything else in there. So compared with the blue one, where the inside was coated, this all dried and shrunk into the middle and ended up with this. So what I would probably do here is not try to keep everything, but pick out the purple parts and leave behind the white, which is the pieces of the container in metal. So I can put this into a little Ziploc or something, and when I need this color, yes, I'm going to brush off these little pieces of the container. So if I need to use some of this purple, violet, then I can just take out a piece of this, rehydrate, and then I am all set. So that's if it gets super hard and you don't want to go the let it soak and get it wet way, which probably would have been bad for this because of all the other gunk that's in there. Let it completely dry out and then cut it open or just pull it open. And now you can get at the color. So this is not bad. This is perfectly fine. Just store it somewhere so it doesn't get dusty and then re-liquefy it as you need it.